What's up, everybody? I'm going to start providing some video slash podcast commentary around some of the articles that I release. And this first one is going to be about the wearable article that I sent you guys last week. And so when we think about fitness wearables, I've got my watch on right here. I know a lot of my friends wear watches. There's a lot of data floating around, and really thinking about it, what's useful, what's not, how do I use this to inform my decision making? And so what I want to talk about is one of the most useful yet somehow misunderstood features on modern wearables, and that's the readiness score. So devices like Garmin, I personally wear a Garmin. I'm not supported by them at all. It's just the device of choice here. But they attempt to take dozens of these physiological signals and simplify them into one question. Is today the day that you're going to push your training, or is it a day that you should pull back? I ask myself that question every single morning when I wake up, before I even look at my watch. But let's take a deeper look at this, right? So at first glance, this readiness score seems like magic, right? You wake up, you glance at your watch, and you see a number that lands somewhere between 0 and 100, right? That's going to tell you how prepared your body is for stress. But we need to remember that that number isn't coming from one single measurement. It's a composite score, so it's a compilation of different inputs that is produced overnight from the body and is calculated when you wake up and check your watch, right? So we need to understand these inputs behind that readiness score and understand that that's what allows you to actually use these metrics. So rather than blindly following it, I want you to be informed about what that number might actually be telling you. So we're going to go through and we're going to break down a couple of the big drivers that typically influence your readiness score. And we're going to focus on Garmin again because that's the watch that I have. But a lot of other devices also provide some sort of readiness score. And within each of these major drivers, we're going to look at how that should shape your decision to train or to rest. All right. So the first one that we're going to look at is this thing called HRV, or heart rate variability. And this is the thing that is kind of like your nervous system stress meter. Right? So one of the biggest contributors to your readiness score is this HRV. And let's talk about what HRV is just for a second before we talk about how it impacts your readiness score. And when you're looking at heartbeats, a lot of people think my heart beats on a regular cadence, 100 beats per minute, same amount of space between each of the beats. But that's not necessarily the case. When you are looking at an EKG, we're looking at different measures of time between each beat. So not the space between each beat is not similar to the one before or the one after. And the reason is your heart is getting all these electrical signals from different parts of the body. We've got a hormonal input. We've got a nervous system input. We've got breathing that plays a part in this. And so all of these inputs, and the heart in its little brain, the SA node, has to make a decision of how fast should I be? And depending on which signal is strongest, it biases towards that signal. So when we're thinking about a higher HRV, which is actually what we're looking for, that's going to mean that your nervous system is balanced, meaning that your body is adapting well to the stress you're placing upon it, whether it be from training or from life in general, because God knows we've got enough of that in our lives as it goes. Lower numbers on your HRV typically signal that your body is under strain. Now, it's not the absolute number that we're actually looking at. We're actually looking at the trend over time. So it doesn't matter what the starting number is, but we're looking at intervals of 7 days, 4 weeks, 6 months that tell us how we're adapting long term to the stress we're placing on the body. But things that typically lower that HRV number from your baseline are things like hard training that you're not recovering well from, a poor night or several poor nights of sleep, dehydration, so whether that's actually not drinking enough water or not providing the electrolytes in the water to be adequately hydrated, It could be from an illness. I know several times over the last few years since I've worn a watch to sleep in, I can look back and say, oh yeah, I got sick here, but in the days leading up to it, I had a significant drop off in my HRV. My clients have noticed the same thing. The other piece to consider is psychological stress, and all of these things are pushing and pulling on the autonomic nervous system for the input for the space between the beats. And we want a bigger variability, right, between those beats. It just means we're in a much better place from a stress standpoint. So why does this matter? If I'm trying to make a decision about my training, why does this matter? Well, when your HRV is in a normal range, meaning it's flat, maybe trending slightly up, slightly down, depending on the day, right? So smaller perturbations in it. It means your body's adapting well. It's more than likely that your training is productive. Now, if we start to see a drop off or a trend downward, that means your system may be overloaded, whether from training, stress in general, dehydration, illness, like I mentioned before. And that's a time that we probably want to consider reducing intensity. We could also look at total volume. If we're talking about strength training, intensity probably should stay pretty high, but volume drops off, or maybe frequency drops off. Now, if our HRV is sharply suppressed, meaning it has fallen off an absolute cliff, the smarter call there may be to take an entire active rest day. Go for a walk, get outside, do some breathing and mobility. And then if it's trending up, again, we're making sure that we're training when we're feeling good, but making an informed decision, maybe if we're not feeling good and the data from our watch matches that. We also have to remember, HRV is a lagging indicator. So we've got leading indicators and we've got lagging indicators. And HRV is a lagging indicator of stress, meaning it's thinking about what you did yesterday relative to what you could or should do today, right? So if you see that your HRV is declining, make sure that it matches up with how you're feeling. If you're feeling good, just know that something might be coming and that HRV is trying to tell you something. Ultimately, we don't want you digging a hole that you're not able to recover from. All right, so that's HRV. That's the first one. The next one that plays really nicely with HRV, and they're closely correlated because HRV typically is measured upon the point of waking, right, is your sleep score. And sleep is the foundation of recovery. Arguably, it's the largest driver of recovery, and a lot of the algorithms that some of these devices use weight it pretty heavily. And so when we're talking about sleep, sleep is the thing that helps with memory. So if you've ever had a poor night's sleep and you can't remember details from the previous day, that's because your body didn't have time to store it into the long-term memory. If you have a poor night's sleep and you're hungry, then you know that, okay, maybe it's because I've been awake for more hours than normal. Again, sleep has a lot to do with our ability to build muscle, create strength, and generate force from day to day. And so when we're looking at it from the wearable lens, right, we want to make sure that we're thinking about a few of the metrics, right? Total sleep duration. We're looking at 6 to 9 hours of sleep. Very few people can get away with consistent 6 hours of sleep, so probably more in that 7 to 9 hour range. And the watch will give you a pretty good idea of that. It's also going to give you a decent idea, not a great idea, but a decent idea of how much time you are spending in REM, or your rapid eye movement sleep, which is where some of the most restorative actions happen, and in deep sleep. Again, these are decent because they're not fully accurate. It's hard to get good readings from an estimate coming from something on your wrist. But what it is really good at is mapping sleep interruptions. So if it's not great at the different types of sleep, it is good at mapping sleep interruptions. That's when you're tossing and turning, or you get up to go to the bathroom, or you just can't sleep and you've got an elevated heart rate. And along those same lines, we're also looking at the heart rate patterns. Do you have a faster heart rate at night? Do you have a slower? Ideally, it's slower. This is when your body should be boosted for its most repair, because this is when it's done, right? Like, we're talking about more than just your ability to perform in the gym. We're talking about lifestyle things like hormone regulation, recovery from stress, immune system restoration, nervous system resets, just general feelings of well being that culminate from all of these different inputs. And so when you get a good night's sleep, you're typically going to have a higher sleep score. That means you can go and train your absolute face off. Go, have fun, make sure that it doesn't impact the next night of sleep. But if you've got a good sleep score, that should be your green light to go for it. If you're somewhere in the moderate range, we'll call this a yellow light, right? Like, maybe training is fine, but maybe your volume maybe need to be moderated for the day. Not a big deal. And if it's a poor night's sleep, maybe you want to adjust the type of workout you're doing. So instead of going in, doing a HIIT interval workout, maybe you want to do some lower intensity steady state if you're talking cardio. Or if we're talking strength, maybe we just want to do some technique work. So we're still refining and training the nervous system, but we're not taxing the muscles maximally. And remember, gang, one night of bad sleep isn't a crisis. But when you start to string a couple of those together, your training is going to be impacted, usually negatively, and that readiness score that you're using to guide yourself is going to come in handy more often than not. All right, so HRV and sleep, the first two. The next one that we're going to talk about is hydration. And while hydration is important, God, there's electrolyte advertisements all over my social media. There's stuff all over the internet about drinking enough liquid. I'm not even going to say water, just drinking liquids. But all liquids aren't created equal, right? And hydration has a much bigger impact on other things other than our ability to go to the bathroom. And a lot of times it doesn't show up as a standalone metric. Like, hydration levels can have an impact on sleep, can have an impact on blood pressure, can have an impact on blood viscosity, which impacts cardiac output, which ultimately impacts your beats per minute, which is going to have an impact on your HRV. So now I hope you're starting to see how all of these things are interrelated. And when you're dehydrated, there's a couple markers that you're going to notice be a little different. I've already mentioned some of these, right? So we're talking about elevated heart rate. Elevated heart rate means the difference between beats, or your HRV, is going to decrease. Sleep quality is going to decline, and your recovery time increases. Even mild dehydration, we're talking 1% to 2% losses in body weight from a workout, means that your body is going to interpret that as a higher stress and ultimately lower your readiness score for the next day. So if you're truly relying on your device to give you that readiness score, make sure to drink your water. Make sure you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables to get additional water into the system. And for this audience, because you're former athletes and still probably pretty active adults, it's going to impact more than just readiness. It's going to impact your cognition ability and your ability to make clear decisions. So if you're dehydrated, you haven't slept well, and you show up to work and you perform like crap, that's not going to positively impact your career now that you've developed after sport. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of the body so that the body then takes care of the mind. All right, so hydration, again, super important. And if you notice that after a hot day, that readiness score drops, or you went out for drinks with your friends at happy hour, or you had a long workout. I know Murph is coming up here in May that some people will be getting ramped up for in the CrossFit community. Memorial Day is pretty damn warm. And that's typically a long workout. So if you notice that the day after that readiness score is in the tank, it's probably because you pushed some intensity, but also you're probably a little dehydrated as well. All right. One thing that Garmin does a nice job of is giving you your training status and chronic training load, right? So it's not just looking at these acute numbers or the night before numbers. It's also looking at what you've done over the past few weeks and months. And so for a device like Garmin, it tracks training load, which represents all of the accumulated stresses from your workouts, whether that's lifting, whether that's cardio, whether that's yoga. Anything that you track in your watch as a workout is going to plug into that equation. And the way Garmin does it, they categorize your training status using some labels, which sometimes it's frustrating. And I'll explain why in a second, but let's get through the labels. The first one is productive. That is green light. That is the one everybody is chasing. I think I've touched productive in my training maybe 3 times in 2 years. I get lucky, yet somehow I'm still relatively fit. So being productive is not always what you need in your life. Then you have maintaining, meaning all of the things that you're doing is helping you keep your current fitness level. Unproductive means there's a high intensity of work paired with under recovery, meaning you're not sleeping well, your HRV's tanking, you're dehydrated, any of those things. I typically get this reading when I travel, high stress environment, probably not drinking enough water. It marks my workouts as unproductive. Overreaching means I'm doing too much. So I've surpassed the volume that makes this productive, and I'm getting into almost an overtraining state. I don't think I've ever touched that one on my Garmin. And then sometimes, like when I go on vacation, down to St. John, I do get a notification that the workouts that I'm doing are more in the recovery label. And so these labels are cool. They're helpful for guidance. But we also have to remember where Garmin is basing their information from. They're not a strength training company. They are I'll call them a jogging company, but they're based on endurance-based sports. So this might not actually impact someone who lifts weights regularly and does the minimum effective dose of cardio to maintain overall health. So again, that's why I'm not too keen on using these. They're helpful, but I think readiness probably plays a better role in helping you make that decision of whether you should train today and whether you should train hard or train a little bit easier. And the reason behind these is like any adaptation, any stress that you put on your body, it requires adaptation. And adaptation requires recovery, right? So thinking about your training load as digging that hole, but then your recovery is filling it back in, right? So basically what we want to do to maintain our training status is to have as much coming out of that hole as we do coming back in. That's going to be maintenance of training status. When we're productive, we're digging that hole and we're probably having to dig it pretty deep, but we're getting much more on the backfill. So we're pulling out X amount, but maybe we're backfilling it with 1.5x. And that's going to help with adaptation, right? So eventually, if we just keep digging, our body's going to push back and we're not going to be able to refill that hole. So the goal here is to dig a deep enough of a hole to create a stimulus, but then use our recovery to refill that hole so that we can go dig again. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, like you want to dig a hole and you want to get, growing up, I wanted to dig a hole through the earth, but now it's like, all right, I know I need to dig that hole and then let somebody put some dirt back in it for me. All right. So I think to say all of these things and that we're talking about training status and training load, we're talking about hydration, we're talking about sleep and HRV. Like, these are guideposts. What I don't want you to get hung up on is that using your metrics that you're getting and treating them like strict rules. These are more guideposts along the way. It's a conversation, right? And if we think about this conversation between your physiology, how your body reacts, and the training plan, the thing that you're following to create the stimulus. And if you don't have a training plan, then maybe you and I need to have a better conversation about how to get a plan in place so that we know what kind of conversation that plan is having with your body. And it's a dialogue, not a monologue. Okay? So if we think that we're having clear conversations between our physiology and the plan, and we're getting some readings from our device, and say we get a high readiness score. So on Garmin, if I'm anywhere between 80 and 100, that means my body is recovered. I am primed and ready to attack whatever workout I have on the schedule for today. If I'm looking at, a moderate readiness score, meaning I'm probably somewhere in the 50s to 70s, pay attention. You can still train and train hard, but maybe you don't go for as long or as many sets as you were originally planning on going for, right? Or maybe there's just some junk data going in that's giving you a junk reading, and maybe you make the informed decision to say, you know what, I'm training for a particular thing. I can push through a little bit of fatigue because I've got a bigger recovery set or session coming up later this week, or I've got a vacation coming up. I'll be able to downregulate then. That's also okay. But when we talk about getting these low readiness scores, and again, it's all about the data going in, maybe it's better to take an easy recovery-based day. Again, cardio, long, steady state cardio in the zone 2 region of things. Maybe some dedicated mobility work where you can open up some of the ranges of motion that you don't currently have access to. You're still being productive to a goal. It just may not be directly related. Or you can just create some general blood flow. And sometimes getting the blood flowing makes the body feel way better. But again, I want you to make these decisions based on the context of your life and not a single data point from a device that is not perfect, right? And, sometimes we need to look at the bigger picture because we know that these devices are getting somewhere in the ballpark of over 30 metrics, some even higher than that, and trying to answer a simple question with all of these complex inputs. And that question is your body ready to train today? Is it ready for stress? And that's a simple question, like is it yes or no? But then you've got all of this input coming into the conversation. And so when we're using this number correctly, these readiness metrics are going to help you avoid a few common training mistakes. The first one being training too hard for too long without allowing for some recovery. That's number one, right? We're going too hard, we're overreaching, and we're probably going to end up in burnout. And some of you have probably experienced that where you've started a workout program, come out of the gates really freaking hot, and then you're like, you know what? I can't do this. I can't sustain it. The other mistake is on the other end of the spectrum, where you come out too soft. You start backing off too soon before you've reached a saturation point. And so your body doesn't even have a stimulus to adapt to. And so you're being very conservative in your approach. You're wondering why you're putting in some work but not seeing a result. The best place to be is somewhere in the middle, where you're pushing hard and allowing for recovery, but your body actually needs something to recover from. So making sure that you're giving it a big enough stimulus without overdoing it, and then allowing for the body to adapt to it. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're combining the data, the objective data that you're getting from your watch, with how you feel, the subjective data. And when you can combine those two things, you can now make a better informed decision. And that's where this moves from the watch being a gadget to a usable tool that helps you along your fitness journey, right? It becomes a guide for smarter training, a guide for recovering better, and really ultimately a guide for staying healthy for the long run. So if you want to learn a little bit more about how to use this data in your journey from former athlete to now athletic professional, reach out. I'm happy to help and have that conversation with you, and maybe it's worth us exploring a plan. For some of you, it will be an awesome fit. For others, it won't be. Applications are open to work with me in the one-on-one setting, so if you're interested, shoot me a message. I'll send you the link for that application, and we can get started on building a plan just for you. Talk to you next week.